Hey there. Thanks for tuning in. Today, we're going to be talking about modern security programs, scaling security, secure defaults, and a number of other things. And one thing I'm in particular excited about is how to embrace secure defaults in an enterprise or a very heterogeneous big environment. But before we get into that, briefly about me. Hey, I'm your host, Clint Gibbler. I run a security newsletter called TLDRSec, which is a free weekly newsletter to get the best tools, talks, and new blog posts right to your inbox so you can keep up with what's happening in the industry. I'm also the head of security research at R2C, a startup that's building SemGrep, which is an open source static analysis tool aimed at helping you find bugs, enforce coding standards, understand your environment, and however you would like to apply it. But I am absolutely thrilled because I'm joined today by my good friend, John Melton. Hey, John.
Hello. Nice to see everybody. My name is John Melton, as Clint said. I am a reader of TLDRSec. I'm a friend of Clint, and for my day job, I run product security for Oracle NetSuite. We are an ERP CRM product for kind of small to medium businesses. NetSuite's been around maybe 20, 25 years. I've been there for 5 or 6. And so I think Clint and I have had discussions and thought this would be a fun talk to have. I have a slightly different perspective because I'm working typically for larger companies through my career. And I have, over the course of my career, tended to oscillate between development roles, just pure software development roles, and then security roles and back and forth, and have found a really happy home helping with lots of really great people to build product security programs. So I'm enjoying this portion of my career right now. So that's what I've been doing the last few years.
Nice. Yeah, thanks for sharing. And I think one thing that I loved hearing from you about as we've chatted over the past few years is secure defaults and secure guardrails and things like that, which I've been definitely beating that drum recently. But I think a lot of my thoughts in that space I feel like either are from you or largely influenced by you. So it's nice to give you an opportunity to chat more about it, because it's something I want more people to hear about.
Right. Well, thank you. We should stop here. That's the nicest thing anybody's ever said about me. So yeah, we're good. I'm not going to say anything smarter than that. So
okay. All right. We'll call it. No. So I think when we were chatting a little bit ago, one thing you said that I thought was very interesting, that I've also heard a couple of other AppSec or ProdSec teams talking about, is who your team is hiring these days, what sort of background or persona you're looking for. So yeah, could you tell me a little bit about that?
We have a few different roles that we hire for. We have I'll say 4 functional roles. We have what you would classically think of as pen testers, and for those roles, we tend to hire people who are good at pen testing. And so that's a smaller role, and we try to scale them out with automation and technology, and we try to use pen testers for pen testing functions. Another role we have is our what we call consultants, our security consulting teams. A lot of teams call them security architecture, partnership, something along those lines. These are people who are, these are people who are, they have built a career successfully on understanding how to make software or make software secure. And we'll take from either side. A lot of our folks are people who have seen a lot of breadth, and they understand how to build relationships, and they understand how to assess and help drive change at the high architectural level. So often there we're hiring either software architecture specialists, maybe people who have previous security architecture experience. When we can find them, that's pretty rare. But for that role, they're people who are more established in their career and really have a good handle on how to make software, and have been doing it for a number of years. Then we have a pure software development role, and we use those folks not to be security folks, but essentially as a development team that gathers its requirements from our security team. And so that's really helpful, because these people are excited by the craft of software development. And they're, that's a standard software development, software engineering role. But we do find that we get a lot of lift. And I recognize by saying that at the outset, we are blessed and fortunate to have enough staffing in order to support that kind of a role. And we started with a one-person team. Now we have a two-person team. But they essentially build tools that help us on the security team extend our practices and automate things. So they are the ones that I would say are tasked with building production quality, software within our team. The last role is certainly the most broad, and that's security engineering, and they do all manner of things. We initially started with what I would call your traditional AppSec folks. Those are really hard to come by, and when you find them, they are, trying to be poached by every company in the world. They're really, really difficult. And so we kind of had a discussion of what would it take to turn somebody from a security background into an engineer, and what would it take to turn somebody from an engineer to help them gain a security background. Now, I'm not talking about going from expert to expert in either direction. I'm talking about going from kind of mid-level senior to mid-level senior, right? And we found that we could up-level software engineers much quicker on security than we could up-level security folks into software engineering practices, right? That it took a larger lift. And obviously, there's a much, much, much larger pool of software engineers than security folks. And so we pivoted and we started going and hiring software engineering talent. And we basically say, if you are interested in security, we will teach you the security bits, but here's what you'll be doing on a day-to-day basis. And some of that team has tended towards gaining more security knowledge. They've been very interested in the security properties, and they tend to move closer in scale to the security person, the traditional security person. And some of them are less interested in security, and they learn just enough to help teams get by, but they're much more interested in, secure default building. And so they're engineering features into the product that are security, or they may build tools or libraries that help teams build into the product. And so we've gotten quite a lot of lift out of that. It's made it much easier to hire people. We're always blessed with, hey, I know a person, or somebody reaches out. That's great, right? You can grow that way, but we've had less luck growing quickly that way. And so when we've needed to scale or staff up, we've gone after software engineers, and we've been really happy with it. It's produced more of an engineering culture in our team, which I really appreciate, given my background of building production software. I'm really keen on not working with teams and saying, oh, it's just terribly insecure, and not giving them solutions. So I think culturally, it's really helped quite a lot. It helps us communicate better, and make our advice more tractable for the teams, more realistic. But it's also really helped to have a good blend, right? One of the key things we talk about whenever we hire somebody is, I don't care if you're level 1 or level 5 or level 3, we want you to become the expert on something. We want you to bring something new to the team that we're missing. And so by hiring some people with diverse backgrounds, and from diverse places around the world and cultures, that's one really nice thing of working for a big company is that hiring becomes a lot easier because the legal framework exists. Because you can hire from really diverse places with diverse backgrounds. We've gotten a really good blend of approaches to how to solve problems.
Yeah, there are a bunch of things that I thought were very interesting about what you shared. So one of the things I've heard from a few people is that, it's easier to take talented developers and give them enough security knowledge to be dangerous than it is to teach someone with good security knowledge, but who, for example, has never programmed before, to make them like a solid developer. Like that lift is just harder. So I think at least 2 to 4 people I've heard that from, even in like the last year alone. And then I think your emphasis on like complementing the security team with people who have a more software engineering background, I think is really interesting. I think, yeah, I was chatting with some friends on like the, I think Netflix, AppSec or ProdSec team.
Oh,
They were
sure.
like, yeah, on our sort of automation, visibility, like all of those like AppSec mission type things that are like, cool, we're just hiring like,
Right.
yeah, we've got a couple of security people who are like, yeah, here's
Yep.
maybe like the problems we're thinking about, but then just very talented software engineers are the people building it.
Right.
And I think, yeah, like Jacob Selassie at Snowflake, I think his team's also been hiring a bunch of software engineers. I think like the Segment security team has been trying to get more software engineers
Yep.
on there. Like, so there's a bunch of teams, I think, thinking this way, which is, yeah, I mean, ultimately it makes sense, right? Because you can't
Right.
like just scale, say, pen testing linearly with, as like development
That's
teams
right.
grow, because the ratios just don't make sense.
Right.
And yeah, there's just a lot of, I think, security tooling and visibility and automation that like ideally is
Right.
written by someone who's good at programming and not someone
Yes.
who writes one-off scripts. Speaking as
Yes.
someone who cannot write production code but can string things together, but like, yeah, I would not want to be sort of solely responsible for yeah, building something people rely on.
Right.
Um,
Right. Yeah. There was a point in time where I wrote production code. That was many gray hairs ago. But yeah, I mean, it's the developer experience is one thing that really has stood out to us. Developers really like when there's one of their own, right, that speaks the same language. And our security teams, depending on the statistics that you believe, there's ballpark one security person per 100 developers. Some places say 1 to 70, some places say 1 to 200.
200, yeah.
But regardless, you are very much outmatched, person for person, and so that scale becomes an issue. So yeah, and I also think we're 10 years ago, I may not have felt that this approach was warranted, because you really did need quite a lot more security knowledge in order to make something safe. Well, nowadays, we have a lot more options. We have safer languages, we have safer frameworks and libraries. We can build homogeneity into certain things. We can put guardrails on things to make the easy path the safe path, which I know is the thing that you have been championing very successfully. But yeah, those are tractable options now that didn't exist 10, 12, 15 years ago. And so if I come to a developer 15 years ago to talk about, how do you prevent cross-site scripting or SQL injection, something really, seemingly pedestrian, my advice might be more complex than use that framework, which would be my modern advice, right? Start with that and you're good. Like, you don't usually have to think about it unless you're doing, some odd corner case, in which case it becomes increasingly transparent that you're doing something odd because they say unsafe XYZ, right? And so by building systems that place guardrails for your engineering staff, their developer experience is just, I get to sit down and build a business feature. I know I'm doing it safe in the background because the platform team underneath me is making it safe. So I think that's definitely a more scalable approach. It took the industry a while to get on board, though, and I do start seeing light bulbs go off, or start to see the light bulbs going off for folks over the last few years. So that's great.
Yeah, one thing you said recently, it was like security should be more pedestrian,
Yes.
where it's just like very, very common, easy, out of the way, transparent even. Yeah, and I love that. And yeah, if you look at the OWASP like XSS prevention cheat sheet, like the older one, it's like
Right.
so long. It's like it's like 5 to 10 pages, and then the like XSS like bypass thing is like also
Yep.
super long. And I'm imagining like telling developers like, okay, so we need you to output encode. And by that, I mean, when you're in an HTML context, do this. When you're in an HTML attribute context, do this. When you're like in JavaScript, do this. And like, if you're in CSS, it's so complex. And it's like this cognitive burden that, yeah,
right.
to your point, should just not exist in the first place. So
yeah, I used to teach those classes. I worked on those documents, And at various points, I thought, yeah, we should just abandon it. Like if this is this is the level of work you have to do to make it work, nobody's going to get it right, including us. We're going to forget, like this is just unreasonable. And I went so far as to, I think everybody, I think you'll appreciate this given your, compiler background. Every developer at some point builds their own language, right? Like it's just a rite of passage. I feel like at some point, either in school or when you start working, I built the language. I'm like, I'm gonna make a safe language that makes all these things impossible. And you kind of hit a wall and you go, well, it's a toy language. If I want to make something useful, it's got to be unsafe, right? At the language level. If I want to make it general purpose enough that people are actually going to want to use it, it's gonna let you cause some problems. And so I thought, well, I could make a new protocol. That was something I didn't want to go down the path. So I think safe frameworks, safe defaults are a pretty good balance of those things without having to kind of retool the entire industry. And they've been obviously wildly successful. We have a lot more tools in the toolbox today than we did, say, 15 years ago. So that's really good forward progress. That's a sentence you don't get to say often in security. We've made a lot of forward progress.
Yeah, I think we have. And yeah, Jim Manico had like a nice talk recently talking about like, hey, look how far we've come. And it is easy to sort of get down on ourselves for like, oh, there's all these things that aren't solved. But objectively, we look at security now versus say early 2000s or even like 2010. It's yeah,
it's like, a lot better.
A lot better. So yeah, let's leap a little bit into so you're at NetSuite, which is a part of Oracle, and there's like many sub companies. So yeah, I was curious. So we'll talk in a second about sort of secure defaults at enterprise scale, but maybe just to give a mental model for like, what does your environment look like in terms of team, source code hosting, CI? Just like give us a feel for like the complexity.
Oracle is Oracle purchased NetSuite 5 years ago. And NetSuite itself had purchased a number of companies. It had been built over many years, partly by acquisitions, partly by internal development. And there were IT teams and engineering teams and operational teams and whatnot. And so they had all kind of iterate, and this is very common in enterprises. And so anybody who's listening to this, with an enterprise background is just kind of nod their head, and anybody who's listening and has only ever worked in startups is going to be terrified. But this is very common in enterprises. There's a sprawl that occurs, right? Anybody who's ever heard the term shadow IT will know what I'm talking about. So back in the great old days, you had data centers and you racked and stacked servers, or you might have a data center literally in the broom closet of your office park that you didn't know existed, and somebody had put 2 desktops in there, and that was now the server room. And so over time, we accrued, either acquiring companies or building internally, a number of different VCS systems on a number of different technology stacks, a number of different continuous integration servers, a number of different artifact repositories, deployment systems, essentially anything. If you drew boxes and lines around your SDLC in your or any startup that's supporting an SDLC type model, they're like, we integrate with all these different things. Most large enterprises, ours included, can say, yep, you got some of the things we operate, and also there's a bunch more. And for really large enterprises, sometimes they'll build new things of their own, right? They needed a tool in 1984, and commercial products didn't come out until 1996. And so, they were 10 years ahead. And so they've got some weird, janky proprietary internal thing. So, lots of financials or healthcare companies kind of end up with things like that. So we have a number of different technology stacks, certainly in what developers build in, technologies that they build in, but also in the supporting technologies. And so what that means is we have a lot, there are certain classes of problems that companies who are integrated on a single technology stack just don't have to worry about. if you are if you go out and you are a startup and you go with the GitLab stack, right? You've got them for VCS, you've got them for CI, you've got them for artifact repository. They do your auto DevOps deployment, and you're on their Kubernetes implementation. Well, you have a single source vendor stack that all of your stuff integrates with, right? And so a lot of people claim you can outsource security by just paying for their security level features. Same thing with GitHub or Bitbucket or any of the other vendors that have a broad set of technologies that they support. Or even if you go with a best of breed model, you still have one VCS, one CI. And so if you want to ask questions like, how many of our pipelines have this security control applied, you hit one API, you ask one set of questions, and you're done. Same for VCS. How many, are we signing commits on all of our repos? If we want to integrate, SymGrep into our pipelines, right? Well, it becomes more difficult because now you don't have a single source of truth. If you have a single source of truth, you can embed into that product, or you can build into that product. When you have many sources of truth, you have to now build an aggregation layer that tells you information across all of them, which almost always drives you to a lowest common denominator kind of approach, because GitHub and GitLab don't tell you the same things about their software. I mean, in broad strokes, they do, but this one's going to have a feature that one doesn't have, and vice versa. So you kind of have to either build a model that accounts for all these one-off things. You may optionally have it here and you optionally have it there, or you just collect the things that are in common. Additionally, another thing it drives is you are less willing to build really neat features, right? Really far-reaching capabilities. If you only have to build in one place and everybody's using the one thing, well, if you build that feature, you implement it one time and you're done. Whereas if I build that feature, I have to implement it 7 times or 3 or whatever it is. I'm not going to get to feature 2 until you're on feature 4, right? Because I had to build feature 1 3 different times. So you can go further down a path if you only have one stack to support. If you're in that situation, you have to know that that's a problem, and there's a couple of different ways to approach it. One that we're working on is consolidation. That's a hard fight to fight because people really like their own things, and it takes time, and you have to get budget and you have to coordinate. We've got teams all across our organization that are trying to consolidate into one place, and they say, I don't have staffing to spend time on this, right? All the normal stories, but it's worthwhile, I think, to go towards it. That's why we're directionally heading that way.
And is that
or you can build that aggregation layer.
Is the move like prompted by like the security team or by like engineering team for like some benefits there? Like, I guess, who is like the primary driver of that? I'm curious, like tactically, let's say someone did want to do that at their company, like how does one go about that?
Yeah. Part of it depends on reporting structures, which become really wonky and wild. So in my organization, I report up through what our team calls cloud operations infrastructure. There's a peer organization for engineering. So most of our software development org lives in engineering. In other words, not directly through my reporting structure. But we also have other teams that are outside of that may also build software. So in our case, I'm the one that drove it, because I was irritable at rewriting things and not being able to support stuff that I wanted to support. And I went across the aisle and said, hey, to our kind of platform engineering team, and said, hey, we're good friends. What would you think if we did this? And they said, that sounds like a great idea. Can you do it? I said, how about we do it together? So there is some political, like, you got to know the right people in your org. And certainly at a big enterprise, it is all about when you try to get stuff done, and you and I have talked about this offline, certainly. Some of the most interesting problems to me are not the technical problems anymore. All those are really wildly fascinating. My job, my role at our organization, if you were to kind of give a quick vision statement, is reduce risk at our organization for the software that we operate or deploy. me sitting down, hopefully people would agree, me sitting down and writing code all day is not the best use of my time, because I have a lot of people that are a lot of great people that work for me, and I want to make them as successful as possible. So a manager's best use of their time is generally not to sit down and hack out code. It's to make the people under them more successful. Well, at my level, my best use of my time is to figure out how we can most quickly, most effectively reduce the most risk and be the most beneficial to the company. So a lot of that means I got to go find the right people that control the right knobs and levers and have the right impact and are willing to do that work and are good partners and all that kind of thing. So those relationships really become key. So the way it worked in our organization is I went across the aisle, I talked to our engineering team, and we did some quick analysis, came up with some numbers, came up with some justifications for the security team, justifications for the engineering team. And we had essentially a sales pitch or an elevator pitch where we walked in and said, this is what we believe the initial impact will be. This is the timeline. You know, we certainly need a project plan that we have to put together. So some program management type resources where we'd have to flesh this out more. But these are the benefits and the wins. And we'll start to see incremental wins, but when we get to the end of the project, we'll see really larger wins. And so we went and pitched that to upper management. They agreed, and we got the resources we needed, and we're executing. And then all those things that I shared, right? Those are NetSuite specific. If you look at Oracle, it's more of the same, just at a larger, much larger scale, right? So Oracle's acquired companies. They recently bought a very large company, I think 25, 30,000 people. Well, they had their own infrastructure. They had their own engineering team, very top-notch group that was already doing things their way. And now they're part of Oracle. And how do those get together? Well, that takes a minute. And who's got the better approach? Can you learn from the companies you're acquiring? Can you pick up the good things and get everything integrated? That's a whole nother story. But that's how those things happen over time. And different companies have different approaches to solving them. I like consolidation. I think it's a good path to go because simpler is better, but it's not always immediate or straightforward. And if you already have that situation, good on you, and be thankful.
I agree. I think it's interesting how you called out specifically, like, yeah, there's maybe some security controls or some visibility or something else you want. And yeah, like if you have to do that n times, you're just not going to get very far, or at least it's going to take you a long time to build to like a meaningful level of the type of maybe more interesting questions you might want to ask.
I was just going to say a good case study is I wanted to ask the question, just run CLOC on all our code. I actually asked an engineer, can you run CLOC and tell me how much of X type of code? And the answer I got back was, how much do you want to answer this question? Like, how accurate does the answer have to be? Because do we really know where all our stuff is, right? This is a long time ago. We've gotten much better, thankfully. But do we really know where all our stuff is? What level of confidence do you have that you know where all your stuff is? The cloud has obviously made that quite a lot easier for lots of people. And one of the great things about the cloud is I can see you paying money on something. If you're paying money for it, I'm going to notice, right? Like accountants tend to notice stuff. They don't let things slip through the cracks. They are more like Cliff Stoll. Sorry, that's an old reference. They will chase down the 18-cent, one-off, and they'll figure out why you're spending money on this thing over there. So that's been helpful. But yeah, it's definitely a hard problem. It's a challenge, but it's an opportunity too to learn more about your systems. And it is a forcing function when you go to ask these questions. I think I mentioned recently to you and some other folks, I feel like more than security, I do visibility work now because it's really beneficial to engineering. It's beneficial to us. It's beneficial to accounting. It's been, you get lots of wins there. And so asking those questions, no matter the environment you're in, is really helpful.
I keep hearing more people and more companies talk about like asset inventory or visibility. So some people will talk about this more narrowly in sort of a cloud environment, like what do you own and what clouds.
Right.
There's new products coming out that are like attack surface management, or basically like looking out in what are all the things you own. But yeah, I think more broadly, like knowing all of your repos, where are they, what's inside them, where are they deployed, and maybe also employee devices and things,
Right.
but really just like understanding your environment. Yeah, so you said that that's been sort of a greater focus of yours recently. I'm curious, like, I guess, what questions did you want to answer, and sort of how have you tried to answer them, and sort of maybe what you decided to tackle first and why, and maybe like sort of where things are headed. Sorry, that was like
Yeah.
7 questions, but choose wherever you want to start.
Well, that's okay. You asked me one question earlier and I answered 7 different ones. Yeah, so I do think a lot of broadly attack surface analysis, asset inventory. I'll tell a side story to that is probably the genesis of why I'm so interested in these questions. Actually, 2 quick ones. One, I used to work on a product or a tool called App Sensor from OWASP, and it was like a kind of like a WAFI thing. You can think of it that way. And when I used to go give con talks about it, the questions I would ask at the end were, how many of you, or I'm sorry, at the beginning of the talk, I would say, how many people in the room? And sometimes there'd be 100, 200 people in the room. How many people in the room could tell me right now how many people are logged into your system? Or sorry, how many users are in your system? Most people could say, I have a user table. I can tell you pretty quickly. Okay, how many people can tell me how many people are actively logged into the system? Like 7 hands, maybe out of 200 would go up. And then I would say, how many people can tell me what people are doing in your system, right? Are they submitting orders? Are they browsing? Are they, be more specific? I bet I had 5 hands over the course of, I've given that talk or some version of that talk more than 50 times. I bet I've had 5 hands that I've seen in total anywhere. And so that really drove home to me, this was probably 10 years ago, but that really drove home to me that we had a real problem with visibility. Now, again, technology's changed as we've moved to certainly cloud native, but microservices were a big move there because you had to have orchestration that would allow you to see things. You had to have traceability and visibility for just general functional purposes, right? And because people started paying money when they were renting servers in the cloud, they started getting really interested in how much people were using it and kind of governance issues. But that was one story. The other story was, and I'm sure I'm butchering his name, but Peleus Hewley, I think. He was, I'm sure he still is, or I imagine he still is, but he was head of security, I think, at Adobe. I think that's right. And he gave a conference talk. This was before asset inventory tools started popping up. I think this was the talk that started them. And he gave a talk where he said they had been tracking effectively all of their assets at Adobe in a spreadsheet that he owned. And this spreadsheet had like 10,000 rows, right? Which, I mean, people were cracking up in the room, right? But it was all these domains, and Adobe had been growing significantly by acquisition. Well, how do you keep track of what you own? Well, their approach was DNS names or domain names. And so he had 10,000. And this would have been probably mid 2010s that I heard this talk. He said he had hacked together, and then he showed us what he hacked together, a bunch of Python scripts. And Peleus is a phenomenal practitioner, but he had hacked together a bunch of Python scripts and like ran them, I think, over the course of a month or 2 or something, in the background. And he would do things like, a lot of what these tools do today, which is look at the TLS cert and see if that is registered on any other domain, or look at the technical contact in the DNS, see if that contact is used for any other DNS record, and kind of pivot to see if I have any other things that I probably do own. And he said over the course of running, I don't remember how long it took him to write, nights and weekends, but a short period of time, and then just letting it run and then reviewing it, he went from 10,000 in his list that he was manually maintaining to 21,000 confirmed that were automatically discovered. And I mean, the room, you could hear a pin drop in that room. Everybody was just floored. I mean, it was at the time a very novel idea. It was like, everybody was sitting there. You could see on people's face, I need to get to my laptop and go start looking for what we own. And so, of course, you have to know what you have in order to secure. You can't secure what you don't know about. And so I think we're learning that lesson in waves, certainly external domains. But what about your code repos? And what are your code repos? How do you classify those? Like, is this one super high risk? Is it some open source product that you forked internally for some reason, and made some minor change? Or is it something that you have spent, $50 million over 10 years building with thousands of engineers? And so you need to know where your code is. You need to know where your your build infrastructure is. A lot of the conversations nowadays around supply chain safety are driving more of these conversations. But in my opinion, if you can trace, preferably all the way back to the requirement, but at least from the code commit through to the running operation, and see that, okay, I wrote this code, only things that were written by people that I trust landed in, the commit. And so we've got a bunch of controls around there. And then the build server builds things and puts them in a trusted place. And then my deployment tool deploys them into operationally. And then operationally, I'm running the things I meant to deploy. If you can connect at least those dots from VCS to CI to deployment tool to operational environment, if you can connect those dots, you can have some reasonable set of confidence about you're running the things you mean to run for some definition that's acceptable. But that prompts the question, do you know all your VCS and the code that's in there? Can you see it? And can you automatically see it? And can you discover when new things crop up? What about your CI server? Are those in-house? Are those externally hosted? Do people have some weird cloud CI that they're building code from, in-house with, or building code from? What about your artifact repository and trusted promotion and whatever? What about your deployment tool? Is it deploying things directly off the internet? I hope not. So I have to have a hook at all of those places, at least all of those places. There are more, but at least those basic places, I have to be able to answer questions. So that's the general thought and approach. Where did we start? We started with VCS systems because I wanted to know where our code was. I think you can make a very good argument to start completely in the opposite direction on the deployment side, because that's what's really running. We had a simpler way of getting to VCS and getting wins very quickly. So we started there because it was low-hanging fruit for us. Our deployment and operational environment was more fragmented and managed by more teams, and those teams weren't as close to us, and we didn't have as good of relationships. So we tackled those later, right? And so that was our reasoning. We were trying to get things done in as efficient way as we could, with as many wins as we could get. So you have more confidence now about what you have, and you can see when things crop up. For CI, what's the relationship, right? What's the connection diagram look like between VCS and CI? Are there a bunch of things in CI are there a bunch of things in VCS that aren't actually being built by CI? That would be really concerning if I've got something in my artifact repository that made it from a developer desktop into the artifact repo, right? We need to lock that channel down so it only comes from CI, but you don't know until you look. You have to start asking those questions. So that's where we went. We ended up finding, and every time you look, it's like picking up, a log of wood outside. There are creepy crawlies everywhere. There are things that you didn't want to see. Every time you pick it up, you're like, oh, why did we? Lots of times it's, people have left the company and somebody didn't know it needed to be archived. So you start learning, you start fixing processes. Oh, when we do terminations, we need to go throw this code away or kind of put it in a glacier somewhere. So there's lots of things to do there, but you have to start looking. And we started looking. We built some internal tools. Certainly there are commercial things, I'm sure, out there that exist. If you are so blessed to have just a minimal set, then do that. Otherwise, start building some tools to look.
Yeah. So what are some of the hooks or things that you put into BCS? Like, I guess, what did you put in place and what were you looking for?
We first wanted to, so we have a platform engineering team. I'm going to take a small divergence to talk about them. Their job, and I think they are, like, if you're an AppSec team, you should work with your platform engineering team or whatever they're called in your organization. These are the people that make sure that all the other developers are running, not walking, right? They're the ones that make sure the developer experience works. All the underlying platform, the plumbing is just as smooth as can be, that I don't have to think about it. I just, push my features. So we want to make sure that the baseline, the platform, is really safe and secure. And so one of the things we do is a bi-directional, how can we help you? How can you help us? Meeting regularly. The leadership from both sides. We have backlog scrubbing and planning together. And so we make sure that the things that are important to me and vice versa. And if we can help each other in any way, we're going to do that. And there's lots of paired projects we worked on together. So one of the things that was a really simple thing that was bringing a lot of pain was third-party library management. We were filing all these tickets going, hey, you're unsafe, your stuff's out of date, or whatever. And they're going, this is just brutal. Can we make this any better? And so we wrote some analysis, like a one-off analysis tool that scanned every product and said, kind of gave a score, right? So these basically are really close to their latest, and they've upgraded over time. So these are really low risk. These, while you don't have vulnerabilities in them today, ancient, and you don't upgrade, you're going to have problems out of these. And so they were able to go and proactively work. That's like a business-driven requirement. For me, the kinds of things I was looking for were really simple, like how many lines of code do we have? That was the first question I wanted to ask. I don't know why. It's a really dumb question, but it's helpful. It's helpful to be able to say this project looks like this. The next question we asked was I built a tool, an attack surface analyzer tool, and it was looking for routes and if you had a web application or an API. For the languages and frameworks that it supported, it would spit out the routes, the parameters, all that kind of stuff, enabling tools for our pen test team, essentially. So we built a tool and some kind of automation around it. So when our pen test team, if they come up, say, for cyclical review on something, and last time they looked at it was 2 months ago, we'll spit out a report for them that says, oh, the last time you scanned this was on this release or this date or whatever. We'll diff your output and show you what's changed since then. They added these new parameters, these new routes, they deleted these old ones. So our pen test team has kind of a focus area to go in and really beat on the new stuff because they've already tested the old stuff. We look for code quality type things, which was a request that came from our engineering team. We look for, we do all of our static analysis scanning stuff. One big tool that we built, and we may talk more about later, I don't know, or we can discuss now, that's been really, really effective and that we like a whole lot is our code review bot. So this is an idea that I stole from, I want to say it was PayPal or eBay.
Laksh's and his team's work at PayPal, I think. Scorebot, I think they called it, maybe.
This would have been, I think it was an AppSec 4 years ago, maybe 5. It was pre-pandemic. That sounds right.
I think I wrote a summary of this talk on TLDRsec because I liked it and I thought it was great. And he's super smart also.
I saw it and I was like, yeah, that's great. We should do that. And what they were using it for was essentially, it looks like you tried to use this API. We're deprecating this API. You should use this other API instead. That was most of the demo, right? And I thought, well, that's great. We have lots of use cases for that. And so we went out and built the infrastructure around this. Some of our people who we hired, who were engineers, were all too happy to have an actual engineering project. And so they jumped into it. And again, because we had different classes of infrastructure that we had to integrate with. They built, plugins to different VCS and code review systems. And essentially the way it works is when you make commits and you create a pull request or a merge request or whatever you want a review of some kind, this bot gets a notification, or it will poll depending on the system, and then it goes in and says, it goes in and analyzes the code using a suite of different tools, and then makes comments on the code review. This is not novel anymore. There's lots of tools that work this way, which is really fantastic. But it was novel, several years ago, and we were pretty happy about it, and still are. It's still super effective. So it makes comments. You can also block. You can also alert if those comments are jumped over and merged. Otherwise, again, those are organizational decisions. But just the simplest case, we want to make comments on code review. So if you're doing something during the code review, which importantly from a developer's perspective is the time when I'm here to take comments on what I'm doing. If you have a primitive there that lets you see the code review and do analysis of it, I think you get quite a lot of lift. It's hitting developers at the right time with the right kind of feedback. So it's certainly limited because all you're looking at is that little review diff, but there's quite a lot you can do there. We had built we'd use greppy type things and some other tools that we had built in-house. A lot of those have since been replaced with SimGrep, which is something I know that you have a small part to play in. But I was like a kid in a candy factory when SimGrep came out. I've said all this stuff I think publicly before, but years ago I used to work on a static analyzer, and Dennis Cruz, who Dennis and I were in a shouting match the first time we ever met. I love Dennis, great guy. We're good friends now, but the first time we ever met, we were shouting at one another because he was telling me that we needed to open source our stuff. I said, "Hey man, you didn't open source yours." And so Dennis had built O2 by this time, and he was doing some really cool stuff over there. So yeah, when I saw SimGrep come out, I had a friend at White Hat who said, "I don't really need our full engine. I just need what he called the grepmaster 5000. This guy, Zach Jones, the grepmaster 5000. And when I saw SimGrep, I immediately messaged him. I was like, "They built it. They built the grepmaster." So the utility of that tool, I could certainly talk about for a long time. But a lot of the analysis we were doing could be replaced, or if you're looking at something like ESLint, a lot of their security rules I think were rewritten into SimGrep. And so we were able to leverage that for a lot of our capabilities, and then we still have a couple of other proprietary things that we built for looking for quirky things on our own. But those primitives are certainly really important, and so we think IDE plugins. Maybe you get some value out of those, maybe you don't. But when you look at code, you can do pre-commit, or you can do like client hooks, or client hooks. You can do server-side hooks. You can do web hooks for analysis, whatever. Code review for us is a really, really important step because it just fits into the ergonomics and the workflow. And then after that, we do weightier analysis using the same discovery tools. So all the tooling that we built to reach out to these different systems, we use it for code review, but we also use it for after the fact analysis, just kind of, weekly scanning, scheduled scanning of everything, or maybe nightly, depending on the repo. Yeah. And then kind of similar type things for CI. CI is more about, do you have the right security controls that we want you to have, the prescribed security controls, which pipelines do, which pipelines don't, are any of our security controls passing, failing? Have we reset the security bar? Have we given you exceptions? That kind of thing. So just trying to productionize that process.
What are some example security controls you're looking for? And I'm curious more broadly, like what are the types of checks you're doing at code review time?
So we definitely have gotten a lot of utility out of thinking about things both from a security perspective, but also an engineering perspective. So anything we build, we want to get the most utility we can, and it turns out that if you kind of squint your eye and look a little bit differently at it, a lot of security tooling is really just, hyper reusable. It's just gaining visibility and information that's really you could use it for performance analysis or quality analysis or whatever. And there's certainly a lot of overlap. A lot of people claim security is a subset of quality, and so there's certainly a lot of overlap in that kind of world. So security controls that we look at, I think we've got a couple hundred custom rules that we're looking at. So everything from are your YAML configs for Kubernetes, do they follow the patterns that we've set, right? Just the declarative patterns, or do they meet the requirements? Are they above, certain thresholds, right? So it looks like you've allocated, 64 megs here. We recommend 16. Why are you doing that, right? Or sorry, gigs. I promise I'm not Bill Gates trying to give people 28K of memory. So 64 gigs of memory by 16. Why are you doing that? Or it looks like your Docker config has something wonky with it, right? Like you didn't follow this security best practice. So there's a class of kind of configuration analysis issues. There's a lot of just basic security analysis things. Hey, you're using SHA-1. Why are you using SHA-1? That's not a good thing anymore, right? Like we've moved on from that. Stop doing that. So there's things like that. And from a compliance perspective, those are really important. And one of the big lifts that we got was we can now run, because we have individual code review, that's a primitive, but we also have global analysis that we run on all of our properties. We can now say both. Here are all the things that are outside of our compliance rules, right? So for those people who've been living under a rock and aren't familiar with SimGraph, one of my favorite design features is they give you a metadata block that's just an arbitrary key value thing. So when you write your custom rules, you tag it with whatever you want. And so we, by configuration, are able to add specific data points that we care about. So you could say something like, this rule is a PCI compliance rule, or this rule is a Oracle or NetSuite compliance rule. So now we can run analysis and say, here are all the places in our entire code base for the rules we've been able to write that we're aware of that we're outside of compliance of whatever spec that we're trying to hit, right? We can also say, the inverse of that is, this project is making a state change by committing this change, right? They were completely compliant. Now they're not, right? Do you want to accept that risk? Because the developer just wants to get the feature pushed, and they may not realize that state change might be a big state change. It may be unimportant, or it may be really important. Sometimes we can accept that risk for a year or a month or not at all. And so it helps inform decision making, because you just have that data at hand. Another really pedestrian thing we've done is just basic coding guidelines, right? You didn't fill in the header the way the header's supposed to be there. Go fill in the header the right way. And that probably has been more valuable to the organization as a whole than our security rules, right? Like, I care about our security rules, but my boss's boss, like, I mean, he cares, but if you can save engineering time by making, the many thousands of code reviews that we do on a regular basis, if you can make those more efficient and have people just not think about everything, it's just the system fixes it, then you don't have to worry about it, right? We did some statistics when we first built the tool. The security team was reviewing like 2 to 3% of the code reviews in the company. 2 to 3%.
A lot, maybe. Yeah.
For us, and we have a vehicle for notifying us when something changes that's security relevant, right? We already had that infrastructure in place. So we had humans looking at 2 to 3%, and that number's probably not changed. That's probably been fairly stable. But we went from, for some very small set of invariants that we want to enforce, right? It was one rule the day we rolled it out. Now it's a couple hundred, and a year from now it'll be, a couple hundred more. But as you continue to build that stack, that's now 100% of the reviews are evaluated against that one rule, right? So you've built a code review person that is now making consistently, without having to think about it, without being sleepy and eating coffee one day, without missing it because something's going on in their house and they just got distracted. They got halfway through the review, went to a meeting, came back and forgot where they were. You've built a reviewer, a code reviewer that's going to get the review right for their definition of right every time on every review, and we are constantly raising that bar. That has been an incredibly powerful primitive. So if you can build a code review bot, or if you can buy one, I highly recommend them. They're super powerful. And for vendors, if you can inject at that touch point, it's super powerful, because that means every change that's coming through your workflow is now getting better, right? So we really like that one quite a lot.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's like such a powerful fundamental capability. I would say, like, not just like, oh, this is a security thing we can do. It's like, oh, we can look at every PR always, regardless of how many developers we have. We could have 100,000 developers, we could have 100, but still we can easily like trivially like do this. And I think measuring security control is very interesting, but I think speaking to it being a capability rather than just a security need, like I know a couple of companies, they have like your Confluence page that's like, hey, here's our coding best practices, or here's how you're supposed to use these APIs, or there's like some documentation somewhere that's in like a static document that people might read during onboarding, or someone may link it to you, but like let's be honest, that document's probably long, and probably most people don't remember all of it all the time. So if you're a new developer at a company, or like, I like your framing of like, how do we make code reviews more efficient and developers more effective? So like, even if somebody, say a senior developer, is like, okay, cool, I know this code needs to be written this way, like every time that they have to manually write like, hey, don't do that, like you just wasted their time. So like, as you build sort of this repertoire of rules or whatever security checks you have, or code quality, robustness, performance, whatever checks, just like, cool, I can think about the business logic and not worry about these like sort of nitty-gritty things that ideally are handled for me.
You bring out training. That's a huge one, right? Because at scale, you have thousands of developers. I mean, engineering is a turnover heavy field. So I don't care even if they're not new developers, they may be new to you and they may not know your internal stuff. We had a good use case that happened not long ago, where we had a significant refactoring of a particular way of doing stuff. And so, we had some lead architect engineering crew that did the refactoring, a one-time shot, wrote kind of some automated refactoring, did a big, change. But then they wrote a rule to validate that people didn't do things the old way, right? By grabbing some old code or just thinking about it the old way. And they verified it. And they put a link, right? Because you can insert references. When the comment is made, it says, by the way, if you're wondering about this, go read this Confluence page, or, link to this internal documentation. So you've immediately like up-leveled all your people. If somebody's aware of it, they don't have to go read about it. They just go, oh yeah, I forgot, And then I saw, I think it was Luke posted, I love it when stuff like this happens. It was a reference to somebody who had written a rule in their own company, and then it happened to their own code.
Yeah.
That's totally me all over, right? Like I write a rule and I'm like, I broke my own, but even if you're one person, right? Like writing your own enforcement, it's just a no-brainer. Golang's done this, I think, with like Go format. I love that, right? All the code looks always the same. And again, you're just making developers' lives easier by not having to think about yet another thing, right? So the more we can encode in the system, you're right. Like, you're not looking at stale docs. The system itself is validating it, and you can change the system if you want. But when you change the system, you got a merge request that tells you why you're changing the system, and it's no longer in some stale other system. So yeah, it's been really effective. You may be able to tell from my passion level. I get excited talking about that one. It's been a big win. So thank you, folks at PayPal, eBay, for the inspiration.
Two related anecdotes that I wanted to share about this that I think are pretty fun.
Yeah.
One is there's a front-end engineer at R2C. So a colleague of mine named Sabrina, and she owns a number of the sort of React widgets for like sort of like refactoring, like, hey, we used to do it this way, now we're going to do it this way. Here's how you should use it. And she's basically been writing SimGrep rules to enforce that other front-end engineers sort of use the component she's built in the way that she intended them to be used. And I thought
that's great.
I thought it's like, so yeah, it's like not security related at all. It's more like, here's how we do this thing. And what I think is cool about it, if you sort of generalize, you could imagine basically whoever owns a specific API or a specific service basically codifies programmatically, like, this is how you should do it, and here's docs to why. Like you can imagine in a company like, hey, our authorization or authentication service, like, this is how you're supposed to use it. Or maybe like, hey, platform engineering team, we built this library we want other people to use. Here's how you should use it. Here's how you should not use it. And you can almost imagine like teams building either reusable components or APIs or widgets, ship it also with basically programmatic advice or checks on like how it shouldn't be used.
That's great.
So
that's super
it's
smart.
early stages, but I think that's super cool. And then the other story I wanted to share is a friend of mine was at a company, AppSec engineer, and they got a few bug bounty reports for like pretty serious like auth bypass type issues. And they were like, okay, cool, let's do root cause analysis. Where is this in the code? And then he wrote some rules to basically some SemGrep rules to find other instances of those. So the bug bounty came in, was like, hey, this is like a P0 auth bypass. In like an hour or two, he found other like P0 auth bypasses that look similar. And then he rolled that out in CI so that now those types of things can't happen again, or at least they'll be flagged.
That's right.
And what's cool is, so he wrote a bunch of rules like this, and then he actually left that company. But the thing is, like, that domain knowledge still lives on in CI forever at that company. So it's like you're building institutional knowledge and like code review knowledge over time.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Those are really clever ideas. I think I do think the institutional knowledge piece is really important. And to your point about like how he I really like your first story. I'm going to take that and go do some stuff with it. That's really super clever. But the AppSec engineer, for sure. But the AppSec engineer, we have a rule that anytime we're doing a code review, if we make a comment, if we see something that we didn't see in code, we don't want to break a person's review flow, but all of our AppSec engineers, when they're doing code reviews, if you make a comment on a code review and we actually go back and have our leadership audit it, audit all the comments, we have the process involves cut a ticket for yourself, which is, a really cheap operation. It's like a Slack message, Jira generate a ticket kind of deal, to go investigate and see if I can write a SimGrep rule or something like it to catch that next time, right? I don't ever want to have to. So we do have stories like that where people will go write something and then they'll find it in 200 other applications, 2,000 other applications, right? Depending on the genericness. I don't know what how generic it is. But I think you're never going to automate code review. Like there's something that humans are going to give that, at least for the foreseeable future, there's something that humans are going to give that the machine's not going to get the context for. But there's a lot that can be encoded. I think more than people anticipate. And importantly, it's things that people get bored saying over and over again. Maybe you catch 4 out of the 7 instances in a review, and you miss 3 of them. Just having a machine do the work for you seems, especially when the effort to get it to do it is so cheap. There's a lot of lift. But even if you don't have a code review bot yet, please go build one. But even if you don't, you get the same lift out of rules. It's just not as codified, and you can run those rules against the applications. And a bash script that curls all of your repos down disk and runs SimGrep over them could work, right? So there's always options.
Yeah, I think my colleagues would badger me if I did not mention that we do have a SaaS web app that makes it easy to write PR comments on GitLab, GitHub, and all the things, and run rules wherever you want. Unfortunately, I think we didn't have it ready in time for when you were were building those.
You built it after we got ours done. We had the code review bot up and running before SimGrep. Like, I think at that point it was sgrep or something. It was still a thing at Facebook.
Sgrep,
there was no R2C. There was no I didn't even know it was a thing that existed at that point. We ported over the SimGrep, and based on our earlier conversation, there's some reasons why it won't integrate with our weird proprietary stuff too. But for people who haven't done it yet, I would highly recommend look at that product, because it's just dumb to have to build stuff on your own if it already exists in the world. Go spend the few dollars that you need to make your life a lot simpler. That's a good call.
Yeah. Oh, one thing I'm curious if you guys do. One thing that we were thinking about recently is you write these rules or security checks using any tool, and they flag different specific like PRs or MRs, and you ideally want some like stats on like how many things for each issue have you flagged,
right?
Are things actually getting fixed? And like, so one thing that we've been playing with is like, cool, you can actually see per rule like how often this is getting fixed. So you can say like, oh, did I roll out a rule that flagged a bunch of times and like nobody's even fixing it? So is that a education thing that I need to create? Is the rule bad? Like, basically it gives you sort of data for like, is this a successful program or not? There's also a way where on like the PR comment itself, I'm curious if you guys do this, where you can like click a button or click a link, and it actually takes you to like this provide feedback page where you can say, hey, this is not an issue because this routing code makes it safe, or I think it's wrong because of this. But we've actually got a lot of leverage out of that, where we have people from a variety of companies basically telling us like, hey, this rule is bad, or this rule forgot this edge case. And like, so we just have like actually like a queue where we like go through these and be like, hey, you were right. Oh, the description's unclear here. I'm curious, do you have like built-in feedback mechanisms into a review bot?
The engineer, the lead engineer on that project, had the good sense to build metrics in. He said, this is going to be unsuccessful if I don't build metrics. I'm an engineer, I'm going to build metrics, and he built metrics. So we had that out of the gate. So that was really good. On the other hand, I think both he and I made the happy path mistake assumption that, this is going to work. It's going to be fine. People are going to love it. It's going to be fine. And people don't always love being told their baby's ugly, right? Like there's a technique to doing that. And so, we after the fact had to learn that lesson the hard way. So we have a feedback mechanism where people can say what they want to say. And we do take that feedback seriously and vet rules. Another thing that we've done, again, through the metadata, we kind of have, dev test prod mode for our rules. And so our rules, when they go out, a dev rule is only going to report to a particular system that our, if you want to call it, code review bot team sees, right? Like, it's not meant for even security engineer feedback. There's kind of three phases. There's, is this thing creating an overwhelming amount of findings, right? If we start scanning and we expect to get 1,000 and we get 1,000,000, turn that rule off automatically, right? So there, it can trip some alarms on being too noisy. So that's the first step. The second step is, well, this looks within the realm of possibility. Let's start having some of our security team that have a vested interest in these things going well. Let's have them, or I should say, what I'll call our rules council, because that's what we refer to it internally. So this includes security team members and some of the engineering team members that both have a vested interest in making sure Code Review Bot is performant and alerting with the right frequency. You know, we want to make sure that our rules are above a certain threshold of fidelity, right? If you could set that bar at 90% or 95%, 98%, whatever your bar is, but you can't be alerting on code reviews with 20% accuracy. That's just a recipe for disaster. And those people take the outcome of that first phase and look at it and go, all right, did we expect to get, you know, if I put in a SHA-1 rule, I probably expect to get 10 hits, not 1,000. If I see 1,000, that's probably wrong. We probably did something wrong, or we're scanning something we didn't expect. And so we get all the metrics and says, you know, maybe out of that 1,000, 900 of them are out of this one application, and it's a crypto test bed. Oh, okay, well that makes sense. We're okay with those findings. And we do come across cases like that with a large random assortment of the code that we have. The second phase is we want our security engineers reviewing these, and then that's where we get initial triage counts. And if we look at that rule for maybe days, maybe weeks, maybe months, depending on the frequency that it's coming through, and all of those findings go through an internal triage process where there's a human in the loop to vet them first. Once they hit a bar that we're happy with and they hit our fidelity rate, then we go in and manually promote them to production rules. Production rules means we don't get notified on the security team anymore. They're just making comments on reviews, right? And sometimes rules can get demoted. We've had that happen once, twice, and there were justifiable reasons that it got demoted. We cleaned up the rule, we put it back in. In one case, we just took the rule out because it was no longer a reasonable rule. But yeah, that infrastructure around the tool, you should definitely be smarter than me and think about some of those things ahead of time. Metrics are really important. Having knobs that you can turn that will keep your developers from getting overwhelmed and flooded with data, another good thing.
Yeah, the way you described sort of the process is what I hear time and time again from a bunch of companies as like, what seems to be, in my opinion, like the best way to do it, which is you're like, cool, you've got some either security team or rules council who create something, you run it for a little while, you send results just to you, and you're like, okay, cool, is this so many things that it's clearly wrong, or is it a reasonable number? And then you're like, okay, cool, let's start triaging some. And at this point, like you're not bothering anyone, like you're not slowing down developers, you're not even showing it to developers, you triage and you're like, okay, this is reasonable. It's like this feedback cycle where you find some edge cases that you shouldn't be flagging, you find some you should be flagging. So it's like the rule is getting better. And then eventually at some point you have enough confidence to like start showing to developers, probably like as comments. And then one thing I've also seen is like, there's maybe a potential step after that, which is like, do you want to just comment and let it be optional to fix, or do you want to like block the build? So for some very small set of things that you're like, I'm so confident this is wrong and it's really serious for us, like you really should not do that. But that's like not very often.
What are your thoughts on that? On blocking? I'm really interested to hear that actually. That's an interesting topic. So okay, I understand your comment now, based on your face's feedback. I agree with your face. Somebody told me that a long time ago and I've never forgotten that comment. I agree. I guess, does it matter the culture of the group that you're talking to? Are there different perspectives that you've heard on that, on blocking with these kind of comments or with these kind of reviews?
Yeah, I think it matters a lot. Company culture, relationship with the security and engineering teams, maybe how big the company is. Is it like maybe reporting structure? Is it like an acquisition, or like are you all part of the same team?
Sure.
And I think one thing you were saying before, like it might also be, hey, we've got really stringent compliance requirements, say like FedRAMP or some other thing where you're like if you do this, this is going to potentially cost the business like millions of dollars.
Yes.
Then you might be like, sorry, we just cannot do that.
I agree.
Yeah, I think my personal, like, unless the culture is really, really good and accepting and like people are really actively wanting to do the right thing, like maybe you can be a little bit less stringent about it. But I feel like most situations probably, yeah, like you need to be probably 95% confident that this rule is only going to flag true positives. And if it's a true positive, it's like higher critical severity would be maybe my like hand wavy criteria.
Yeah, this is very timely conversation. We're actually building right now, and I just had lots of arguments with people about this. I think the trade-off, right? Like I agree with your and in our organization, if we had a rule that said you're going to make a state change from compliant to non-compliant for some compliance that matters, right? Not just some internal thing that doesn't have teeth. But yeah, if I mean, oh, we're going to get a GDPR violation if we do this. Yeah, we shouldn't do that, right? Like we should block. Or, oh, you're no longer PCI if you do this. Yeah, let's don't do that, right? Those are justifiable reasons. I think the trade-off is there has to be because in the model where you're just making comments, okay, if your bot's down, who cares, right? Like, I mean, that's not great, but if it's down, if you're blocking and somebody needs to push and it's a false positive, or somebody needs to push and it's a true positive and the business wants to accept that risk, you have to have all those bits and bobs in place. And you have to have 24/7 support in case the system ever goes down, because you can't block and have the system go down, right? So it is a maturing level. The step we're going to take next, because today all we do is comment and take feedback. The step we're going to take next is, if it's for something that does meet that, what I'll call blocking criteria, we're going to attach to the comment some notification, red blinky sign. If I can figure out a way to put blinking red text on it, and some MySpace icon, I probably will. But if I can, we're going to say, if you don't resolve this properly and fix this, heads up, we're going to notify you. We're going to notify the security team, and we may notify your management chain that you went forward with a change that you knew you shouldn't have gone forward with, right? And so something like that, where organizationally that's more tractable because you were able to push the code, but everybody who needs to know about it knows that you circumvented this code review, right? And we told you shouldn't circumvent the code review, and everybody who did your code review, the 4 or 5 other people that were humans reviewing it saw it, and they should be aware. So we're going to go to that path and see where it takes us. But blocking, we've always talked internally about, we should build that. It has not become a feature that we've decided to build yet, for the reasons I laid out, which I'm kind of scared. We have, to be clear though, we have other checks that you're not going to push that code if it has that in it, right? Like we don't have continuous delivery directly to the customer for anything that would cause those compliance issues, right? When you push that code, it's not going to be in the customer's hands in 3 minutes or 5 minutes. It's going to take hours, maybe days, depending on the product line. So we'll have a chance to see it. So that'll be interesting.
So I guess I feel like there's some interesting stuff to chat about, specifically around like secure defaults in your environment, like but I want to be like cognizant of your time. If you're like oh, I've got to leave, but if you had a little time, you wanted to chat about maybe how you like what are some maybe specific secure default initiatives, or even I think how you knew where to start. I feel like I hear a lot of companies talk about that being a challenge. So yeah, maybe let's start with that. Like, okay, you're parachuted into NetSuite, and you're like, okay, secure defaults, paved road. This sounds great. Like, how do you know where to start?
When I came and joined NetSuite, it wasn't actually for NetSuite. It was for a company that they had just acquired, which was a kind of small startup-y company called Bronto. And they were a really cool company, had a great culture, and they were building small microservices, which at the time wasn't the story at NetSuite. Everything changes over time, but at the time, that's where we were. They didn't have a ton of security rigor. They were a good development shop. They had what I would call artisanal developers, right? They had people who really cared about their craft and were trying to do the right thing, which made my life a lot easier because they wanted to do the right thing, and they had made good technology selections generally because they were looking for things that were that supported good architecture. And a lot of times, better security falls out of good architecture just more naturally. And so they had made some good technology choices, which helped. Another thing that was really nice, they had really focused strongly on, I'll say, a more homogeneous environment. They had a lot of things that were either consolidated into one stack, or they had, two stacks, the legacy and the current, and that was it. There was not 3 or 7 or 10. And so when I would come in there, when I joined there, I wasn't, I guess, using the term paved path or secure defaults. I think I stole those from you. But
Netflix and others talk about them.
Yeah. I think when I joined there, I just really was looking for, how do I make this thing better, right? Which was more homogeneous. And so it was doing the thing that was working on the thing that was common to most people. And my approach was, I want to do the least amount of work to hit the most amount of risk, right? I already knew that. I knew that was a good bet to make. Less I have to do to make more things better is a good trade-off. And so I just started looking at the stack that they had and trying to figure out what terrified me, I guess would be the statement. What I didn't understand, it was a largely Java shop, which was kind of in my wheelhouse. They were doing microservices, which I understood at the time. They had some internal tooling, which I didn't understand. They had some high availability scale that I wasn't used to. And so I had to learn some things there. And some of the authentication and authorization schemes in those products were pretty crazy, and I hadn't seen them before. It's like, this is not great. A lot of the distributed models were kind of janky 8 years ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, 10 years ago. So anyway, that's kind of how I started. So had I had the time to start again, I might would have taken a similar, but a similar approach. And for people who want to see more detail there, I actually gave a talk after being their security person for 2 years, and I forget what it was called, a security retrospective or something like that. And so you can look it up. I think I gave the talk at Locomoco Sec 3-4 years ago. So it talks about, I spent 2 years, and here's what I tried to do each quarter. Here's what I thought I was going to get done, and here's what I didn't get done, and why. So I don't want to re-give that talk, but I think a lot of the things that I learned through that were, you don't necessarily know, especially if it's your first time trying it. It's hard to gauge what's going to take longer and what's going to take shorter, because you're in a new environment. You don't know the training level of the people you're working with, right? If you're a founding engineer and there's 10 people at your company, you probably have a pretty good idea. But if you've got 100 or more people, there's a lot of disparity across the team, maybe. Finding what people now call security champions is really important. People who would give me the inside scoop and tell me what to look out for. I didn't do a formal security champions program. I just started calling them my friends, friends of security. So we've actually replicated that now. We call our internal team trust services. And so we call our internal group the Circle of Trust. And we've got really good swag with, this whole thing from that old Meet the Parents movie. But yeah, I mean, having people that can be eyes and ears around and kind of go, hey, you might want to know about this, or what should I do here? And more formally, we also have a Security Champions program, which is a more formal version of the same thing. So that's a really good place to start. They can help you if you're strong engineer, you can grok the stuff yourself, and you should definitely understand the tech stack that your company's dealing with. If you're a less strong engineer, work with people who are better at it than you and ask them a lot of questions. Ask for what your leverage points are, where the places, some things are baked in and you are not going to have an easy time replacing them, right? So when I came to Bronto, I did not realize how integral Redis was to their infrastructure. And I had read a bunch of stuff that said Redis was bad at security. So I said, we got to rip Redis out. And they're like, nope, get out. You are ineffective. You are not doing good at your job. So understanding what that is, and I mean, we definitely made a lot of things better, and Redis got a lot better, and I misunderstood, and I was brash and had some hubris. But understanding what things are really critical and what things are changeable, what knobs you can turn, and you have to rely on your engineering staff to tell you those, and so finding friends there. What things did we do that were effective, or what places would I look for paved paths? Technology selection is a big deal. So Netflix has a lot of talks that they've given about this, where they cover their principles of freedom and responsibility. So I assume this is still true. If you show up at Netflix and you're going to work on an application that uses all of the normal frameworks, it just works. All the security apparatus is there. Everything flows through. You use their AMIs, their development environments, their language, their frameworks, and on all their same versions, the flow just works, right? CI takes it where you want it to go, and everything is nice and happy. If you want to deviate from that, okay, you can, but you now are responsible for getting that security apparatus in place to make sure all those same primitives flow through, or a reasonable approximation of them. So if, I don't know what their stack is, but let's say they were a Java shop and you want to come in with Golang. Well, you either have to get it approved as a core supported language where the security team decides they're going to own that, or you have to work with them to get it up to snuff. If I was a security team, that would be my single first thing I would look at is, what are the languages we're using? What are the technology stacks we're using that support our SDLC? And how can I influence that? How can I make it less? I want fewer things. And the things we do use, I want us to have made good decisions about. So who makes the technology decisions in your company? Is it the architect or a council, or who does it? And why are they doing it? Where's their decision records for why they did it? Which ones they chose? Can you influence that? Can you get on a board that makes those decisions? So that would be where I'd start. And then trying to, another thing that I would do, this is another hard one lesson. I know it's not sexy to people, but policy actually matters, at least at large organizations. If you get everybody to agree and write it down and sign a piece of paper that says this is what we think is real, that's a huge win. If you can get, engineering and security and product management and yada yada, you can get all those groups to say, yeah, this is how we're going to do it, and then they actually follow through on it, then those are huge wins. And then one thing we talk about internally is codifying the SDLC. So what automated controls can I put in place that make sure we're doing the SDLC policy as written? And sometimes that's a human, sometimes it's a process, but as much as we can, we want to automate it with technology to enforce all of those constraints. And now, since you agreed, this is how we're doing it. If you're not doing it that way, I now, either get alerts or I block you from doing it the wrong way. So make sure you're doing software development as consistently as possible everywhere. If you have the ability to control, technology selection, or at least influence it, I would do that as many places as I could. And then I would start looking at below language selection. I would, when I say technology stack selection, I mean the language itself, sure, Like if you have the opportunity to choose between Rust and C, I think, most security people would recommend you go with Rust nowadays. If you can do a managed language, maybe that's your preference. But below that layer, or above that layer, I guess, what frameworks are you using? Security people have good knowledge about why you should use certain frameworks. Do they have a better track record with security? Maybe, and we actually invest a lot here trying to make better informed decisions about when we do library selection or framework selection. We try to work really closely hand in hand with our architecture team to say, these are the reasons why we like this. These are the reasons why we don't like this one. We don't have a particular opinion about these other sets of things that you care about, but this part we really do care about. And so we've kind of inserted ourselves into that decision-making process. So if you have a process there, and you're not just kind of YOLOing whatever's on the internet, if you do have a decision about what technology you're going to choose, I would, choose that. And then lastly, along that path is, if you have the capability internally, it really, 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 really helps to look at the areas, as best you can make an assessment. What are your biggest security risks? And that's a loaded question, I realize. But in your organization, maybe it's, data access. And so you really want to think about solutions around data tagging and tracking, or maybe it's, front end and you really want to think about that, or it's the authorization scheme or whatever it is. You have some feeling, hopefully guided by numbers, about what's more important than other things. If you have the capacity or can build this capability to do actual feature engineering, either on the tooling side or in the product itself, if you can have a security team that builds security features into the product, that's really great. But even if you can't do that, if it's behind the scenes code that your developers use, and you can give them a way to make the right decision as they're going, using all the stuff we've already talked about, those would be the places I would invest. Is that practical? I don't know. It feels like some hand waving.
I think I think there's a lot of specific, it was both like good strategic advice as well as I think some like tactical things that I think are super useful.
Sure.
But thanks for sharing.
Good.
I guess to wrap up, is there like a maybe like a final message or like key takeaway or two that you want people to make sure to remember? I mean, I'll maybe like write some key points or like takeaways or something, but wanted to give you some space if you're like, there's one or two things that I want to emphasize or that I haven't talked about yet that I think are super important.
I think a couple things that would help me be less intimidated when I joined. The industry was a lot smaller when I joined. I'm some years old, and so some very years old. So it's a little less intimidating, but it is really. I still have a lot of fun with it, and so I think what I would say is things have gotten a lot better. I think there's a pretty nice path for things to continue to get better. I really like the field. So to encourage those who are listening, if you're not completely sold on it, find good people and hang out with them. And that's really the second thing is, out of ignorance, I think, more than anything, I just asked people that I didn't know they were important people. And I just asked for help. And, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? I remember getting a very sweet printed typewritten letter from Gene Spafford saying, I don't know who you are. I generally don't respond to people that I don't know, but just to answer your question, so there are, certainly like any field, there are jerks in our industry, I'm sure. But there are a lot of really smart, really nice people, and like talk to them, become part of the community, and learn from other people, and certainly share what skills you have. Because again, no matter where you are, whether you've been here 3 months, 6 months, or 20-something years, you're going to benefit the group, and you have a perspective that's unique. And so I learn all the time from new people to the field, and people who've been in the field longer than I. I think the community is what excites me most. And seeing people build really neat stuff and make our industry better. I'm proud to do the things that we do, right? Like I really do feel like we're substantively making a positive contribution to society, right? And so people are safer because of the work that you do, hopefully. And you know, that's a worthwhile way to spend your time. And so I guess just to encourage people, because I know security can be draining sometimes, but to encourage people that, you know, it's a worthwhile effort, and that you do need community, and we have a pretty nice community in general, I think. And certainly, you know, ping Clint, he's super smart and very helpful and well connected. He knows everybody.
A few people, yeah, people who reach out to you as well. But yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
I love that message. I agree, and I think it is very inspiring to think that we're helping keeping things a little bit safer. The things that people use every day.
Right.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah, John, thank you so much for your time today. I've had a blast. I can link to your like Twitter and LinkedIn and things like that, so that people can say hi, or maybe ask you questions. But yeah, is there anything else you want people to check out?
No, but please do feel free to reach out to me anytime. I talk to lots of people. It's one of my most favorite things. So yeah, don't be a stranger, for sure.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I had a blast, and I'm excited to share this with other people. And yeah, take care. Oh, and I guess if you're watching this recording, feel free to like or subscribe or whatever people say these days, so you can see other things. But yeah, have an awesome rest of your day.